everybody. This is Father Ted for another episode of Fr.TEDTalksXtra. We had a question in our Gmail. Somebody had asked us, and also in one of our live shows, if we could do a small explanation of the icon screen, the altar icon screen, which is behind me, the wall that separates the altar from the nave, from the general population of the people. And this video will kind of just give you a quick little breakdown of the icon screen so that we can kind of understand what icons exist on it, why the icon screen exists, and everything like that. So let's take a look, shall we?
So every Orthodox church will have an icon screen or an iconostasi, and it's the wall that separates the holy altar or the Holy of Holies from the rest of the congregation, from the nave of the church. Inside the altar represents the Holy of Holies, just like in the Temple of Solomon, and the nave represents the New Testament time, the time that we are living in now, like the people of God. And the narthex in the back of the church, where we light the candles, represents the Old Testament. So we have a progression from the Old Testament to the New Testament to the kingdom to come, which is in the altar. This is why it's elevated, and this is why we receive Holy Communion. It comes down from heaven to us, and it meets us here, where heaven and earth meet, and the people receive Holy Communion at this spot. So the iconostas, it's pretty standard. You're going to see a lot of different ones in different churches. Some of them have, this one has two tiers, as you can see, one tier and then a second tier there. Sometimes you will see ones that go all the way up to the ceiling, especially in more Slavic churches like Russian churches. You'll see these massive iconostases. But it's important to know that originally, like especially for example at the time of St. John Chrysostom in the 4th century, in the late 300s and early 400s, the templo or the iconostas was not a full wall as we see it today. What you would have been a small kind of like barrier. If you can see here along the bottom here, see this kind of almost marble looking wall here with columns. And if you can imagine that there would have been a barrier like that, but there would have been columns, and then maybe a top chancel barrier going across, like a beam going across, but everything in between would have been open. It would have been like open space, open windows, and you could see basically inside the altar. There would have been a curtain that would have been drawn across during the time of the epiclesis, the calling down upon the Holy Spirit, but generally speaking, people could see inside the altar a lot more. Over time, as the centuries passed, and there was a huge influx of Christians, and Christianity became legal, and more people became Christians just by kind of, I guess you could say, just cultural habit as opposed to an active choice, which we see today as well a lot of times in our churches, and the understanding and the spirituality of the general population kind of fell. The church in its wisdom wanted to kind of emphasize the mystery of the mystery of the sacrament, and also the importance of the Holy of Holies. And so slowly the evolution happened where the iconostas became taller and also was filled in by beautiful icons to block it off, to make people understand that there should be an awe and a mystery when we approach Holy Communion and when we approach the Holy Altar. And so this is how the evolution of the iconostas kind of evolved. When you walk into an Orthodox church and you look at the iconostas, there are some things that will always be standard in the iconostas. First of all, is on the right-hand side is always Christ. You always see Christ to the right of what are called the royal doors. These are the royal doors. And to the left is always the Virgin Mary, a lot of times with Christ as a child, but always you'll have Christ in order of priority, and then the left will be always the Virgin Mary. After Christ in priority, now this templo here is a little bit tricky because we have doors here. Usually the doors should not be here in the architecture of an iconostas. They should be after the next icons. They should be the third icon over, but because of the architecture of this church, we had to put the doors closer to the royal doors. So you see that there are archangels, but the archangels are always at the doors because the doors are the threshold between heaven and earth, is where the deacons move and the altar boys move in and out of the altar. And so they are the messengers, just like the angels are the messengers. And so you always see the Archangel Michael and the Archangel Gabriel on the doors that go in and out of the altar. Or sometimes you will even see deacons in some Slavic traditions, where you will see Archdeacon Stephen, things like that, because they are also the deacon doors, they're called, because the deacons move in and out of them. But if you take this door and move it to the side, you will have Christ, the Virgin Mary, and then the next icon in order of priority is St. John the Baptist. St. John the Baptist is the third most important person. And then after St. John the Baptist, on the other side by the Virgin Mary, is always the saints of the church. Here we see St. Constantine and Helen. So, every church is named after a saint or a biblical event, and you will always find it to the left of the Virgin Mary, our left, her right, and it's always the icon of the church. So if you don't know what the church is called and you're in the church, you always look to the left of the Virgin Mary, Again, usually the doors are further over, and you will know what the church is called. And so, and then any further, depending on how big the church is and how big the iconostas is, as you can see here, we have space for one more saint. You will have secondary saints depending on the people who founded the parish, and perhaps they had saints that were very dear to them, and maybe they had saints that they just kind of like chose because they were popular in a specific area of that country. And so here we have like Saint George Victorious, and we have Saint Ephrem of Aioros there, but there'd be different saints, right? They vary. And so this is kind of like always the same order that you'll see. Christ to the right, Virgin Mary to the left, Saint John the Baptist, the saints of the church or the saint of the church or the event. And then of course on the deacon doors will always be the archangels or deacons in the Slavic tradition. Sometimes you'll have a second level, which is up here. Here we happen to have the Last Supper, and then we have like the major 12 life events of Christ, the 12 feasts. Here we have more, so they've added other extra icons as well. Sometimes you have the 12 apostles or other motifs, and so on and so on. There's a lot of different designs that you might see. So, but this is kind of like the general rules that we follow in the iconostas. On the doors, on the royal doors, as are here, you'll have like different motifs. Sometimes you'll have the Evangelismos, the Annunciation, like the Virgin Mary on one side, and then the archangel, telling her that she will conceive and bear a son. Then sometimes you have the four evangelists, as we have here, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There's different motifs. There's not just one thing you could put on the royal doors. So again, like there is some variation, and that's beautiful because you can see different things. But generally speaking, there are some things that don't change. For example, as Christ, the Virgin Mary, Saint John the Baptist, and the saint of the church. So this is our iconostas. It's a humble iconostas, but you can see here what it looks like, and it does separate the altar, the Holy of Holies, from the nave, and the worshiping congregation. And as you can see here, this is kind of like the setup. So I hope this kind of gives you a little bit of a brief rundown of the iconostas, or the templo, sometimes it's called, or the icon screen or altar screen. You'll hear it referred to in many different ways. Basically the barrier that separates the altar from the rest of the congregation. So I hope this was helpful. God bless all of you, and we'll see you on the next Father TED Talks Extra. Take care.